over the last 2 years, James and I have spent a lot of time together, and we have a great relationship. There's the respect level from my end is incredible. I think we're fortunate to have James stay in that senior advisory role. He's going to lean in and help with the player 15 group, with the Suns and with the Mercury. So again, I think it's our relationship will only continue to grow on the professional and on the personal level, because he's a heck of a guy. You know what I mean? And I'm looking forward to that.
That's Brian Gregory, new Suns GM, yesterday in his press conference, again, that we carried live here on Arizona Sports during our show, in particular the Burns and Gambo show. James Jones staying for now in the organization, moving more to a senior executive type of role in which he won't obviously have the say that Brian Gregory will. Brian Gregory is going to be the decision maker when it comes to the front office. Gambo, if I were to say to you, to describe as simply as you can the James Jones era for the Phoenix Suns, James Jones in particular during the James Jones era, how would you describe it?
Successful.
Okay.
They made it to the NBA Finals. He didn't draft Devin Booker, but he drafted. He was there, and it was still Ryan McDonough with Mikal Bridges as well. But on that team,
I think James had a lot of influence on that pick.
Ryan is the one that made the trade. He could have had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They hesitated, and they didn't end up with Shai. And then because they didn't want to give up like this unprotected pick that they had in one of the years. And then finally, because Ryan liked two guys that he wanted to trade for. One was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and the other one was Mikal Bridges. And they hesitated on the trade to be able to put themselves in a position to get Shai because they didn't want to include this unprotected pick down the road, which I can't remember which year it was, but it was one of the last 2000 something, 20 pick or 21. And then they eventually gave it. They eventually gave that pick when they got Mikal. So they gave that pick when they ended up doing the deal, I think, with Philly, and they ended up with Mikal Bridges. That was right. But then Cam Johnson, the Chris Paul trade.
Yep.
I think a lot of that was James put a roster together with good role players that we all liked, Cam Payne and Dario Saric and Frank Kaminsky and just a bunch of good role players. So I think that he did. I think it was successful. Now, he obviously made mistakes and passed on. Well,
hello, Tyrese Halliburton
for Jalen Smith.
Yeah, hello, Tyrese Smith. It is. And Dan Bickley, our colleague and friend, wrote a column about this at ArizonaSports.com, in which he said it's ironic that we're having this conversation about James Jones today when one of his literal greatest mistakes is on the biggest stage and he's just killing it right now, right? So it's like, boy, we are really accentuating the negative here. I'm glad. I agree. I think it was a very successful run for James Jones. And
we had a story about it was a complex legacy. I think was the story we had.
Complicated. I believe is the word that Bickley used in the headline of the story. Yeah, it was a complicated legacy. You don't think it was? I don't think it was that complicated at all. I think it was a very successful legacy.
I think it was successful because it led to a lot of wins.
I'll take that back. I think what made it complicated, I think what you could argue makes it complicated is how it ended in particular. And we've had this conversation 100 times, so we don't need to have it again. Is just kind of the uncertainty of who was calling the shots at the end, right? Like for the last 2 years, how much of it was James, how much of it was Matt, how much of it was Josh, and for me anyway, that's where I could say, okay, it's a little complicated, just trying to figure out who was responsible for what at the end. But it was also kind of the same conversation at the beginning. Who was responsible for what? Who was responsible for Mikal? Who was responsible? When there was the awkward overlap between Ryan McDonough, who was clearly not the favorite son anymore, and James Jones, who clearly was the favorite son of Robert Sarver. Who exactly was responsible for what during that muddy time? Is anybody, right? It's kind of the same thing as it was with James at the end. All I know is this, and I looked this up today because I thought, okay, I'm not a fan of what is going down with Brian Gregory. We've talked about this again, round and round. But if he's going to make this right, and if he's going to do this right, I went back and looked at James Jones's first off season as the true general manager of the Phoenix Suns.
Was that when he hired Monty?
Yes. No Ryan McDonough.
No, he hired Monty.
James Jones. Okay, not only did he hire Monty,
Traded for Chris?
that was the season later. That was the next season. These are the players that he brought in. Okay. Now and I won't color the conversation with my opinion here. I'll just give you the players. Here are players that were new to the organization that he brought in when he took over. Aaron Baines, Javon Carter, Ty Jerome, Cam Johnson, Frank Kaminsky, Cameron Payne, Ricky Rubio, Dario Saric. Now, before you say where's Kelly Oubre was already with the Suns the year before, so right. he had joined. Now, I believe James. Well, actually, I think you can count Kelly if you wanted to, because I think that was a mid-season acquisition of Kelly Oubre, and at that point, James was the general manager. But let's not count him for now. That's a hell of a splash, Gambo, for your
first. A lot of good players.
Right? Like, listen to Aaron Baines, Javon Carter, Ty Jerome, Cam Johnson, Frank Kaminsky, Cameron Payne, Ricky Rubio, Dario Saric with Monty Williams as your coach. Culture-changing guys in one off season. You want a blueprint to follow if you're Brian Gregory? There it is.
But then, you know what? Like, that season in the bubble was so satisfying that they finished 8-0, and you thought, oh my goodness, the future is so bright, and then they get rid of those guys and they trade for Chris Paul. So like when they traded for Chris Paul, they traded Rubio and they traded Oubre in that deal for Chris. So like they moved on from those guys.
Ty Jerome too was gone.
Ty Jerome didn't do anything to help the Phoenix Suns.
No.
We like Ty Jerome now, but when they had him, he wasn't anything.
Yeah, but I also felt like, he got rid of a lot of those guys, but he also kept the ones that in some ways needed to be kept, right? Like Cam Johnson, Kaminsky stayed around, Cam Payne stayed around, Dario Saric stayed around. Like, I get he didn't keep all of those guys, but you had a chance for Chris Paul. You had to go for it if you were James, I think.
Right. And I think a lot of people might not have, because you started to look at Chris and his age and, because you start to worry when players get to be that age. And so when they traded after that 8-0 run, and then they made that trade for, and Ricky Rubio was like, hey, it was the first time they had a grown-up in the room at point guard.
Amen to that.
But you're talking about Chris Paul, who's going to go to the Hall of Fame. You get a chance to get him, but I think he was like 35 years old when they got him, Chris Paul.
Yeah, I think it didn't end well, but obviously it started terrific. I mean, it was, to me, I'll never second guess that. We can second guess Kevin Durant all we want. We can second guess Bradley Beal all we want. I will never second guess the acquisition of Chris Paul, no matter what the cost was.
It was great.
Fantastic.
It was terrific.
Yeah, that's my point about it. Okay, I guess enough about not necessarily the bad about Brian Gregory. I'm going to have my doubts for a long, long time. But if he wants to make it right, I'd love to be able to have this conversation 5 years from now and say, look at what he did in his first offseason. Look at who he brought in and see if it compares to what James Jones did in his first true offseason as Suns general manager. Because that was a banger for James. It really was. He went 4 for 5 with 3 doubles and a home run, man. I think he killed that offseason.
Yeah. Well, he didn't have a big commodity to trade either.
No.
Like they didn't have all these big, you talked about what they traded, like Abdul Nader, Ty Jerome, Kelly Oubre, Ricky Rubio. Like Gregory's got Kevin Durant to trade.
Yeah. Yeah,
you get to trade Kevin Durant.
Yeah, so it's you do it right, and you've got a chance.
Thanks for watching Burns and Gambo. Click to see more from the guys, and hit the button in the middle to subscribe so you never miss a video from Arizona sports.